All right, well, welcome back, everyone. We are back for a third conversation with Manuel Mergal to discuss traditional architecture. And today we'll be looking at Katsura, Imperial Palace in Japan, and Monticello here in the US. So Manuel, welcome back. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So we have talked about so far about 4 buildings. We're going to talk about 4 more today. It's going to be Katsura, which doesn't look like any palace, European palace that you can imagine. It actually looks like a fancy house. And Monticello, which is also a fancy house, actually. We've talked about China's Forbidden City. We've talked about Voronet, the cathedral in Seville, and the Taj Mahal. In all cases, there's an exploration, there's a relationship between the cosmos, that is a transcendental idea behind the architecture, and or nature and the architecture itself, and the building itself. In China, there was this north-south axis that we had, right? The Polaris star was almost the symbol of the emperor. The emperor and the Polaris star. The emperor identified himself and his court with the Polaris star. So it was the center of the universe, or he was the center of the universe for China. Even the colors of Chinese buildings are related to nature in some way. With Voronet, we introduced the idea of heavenly mansions. Okay, so heavenly mansions on Earth in a building, right? We have all these ediculas painted on the outside and on the inside of Voronet. And then in Seville, we continued with the idea of the heavenly mansions, but this time they are carved in stone. Right? The lacy, frilly quality of the architecture in Seville almost dematerializes the architecture and emphasizes the idea of heaven rather than earth. And the Taj Mahal is almost the representation of paradise, a paradisiacal garden on earth. The Taj Mahal. So, if I may go to the presentation now of today's slideshow. Current slide, great. So Katsura and Monticello represent opposite ends of an architectural spectrum. One is organic, and it is part of nature. It is part of a garden. The other one is very rational. In fact, Jefferson is almost the paradigmatic American figure that represents French Enlightenment in America. I might say, arguably. Somebody may have an issue with that, but I think that's fair to say. So just like the Taj Mahal was an earthly representation of heavenly mansions in the Garden of Paradise on earth, Katsura is based on the relationship between the building and the garden. Okay. Here you see my cursor here? This is you see it here?
I see it, yep.
Okay, this is the so-called Palace of Katsura, which is a series of 3 houses in one. The Koshoin, which is the old house, the Shosoin, which is the middle house, and the Shingoten, which is the more modern house. They were all built in the 1600s. So when we say modern quote unquote, right? And Katsura is basically a garden which is dedicated to the tea ceremony. So the reason why the nobles came here and the emperor stayed here in the Shingoten was to participate in the tea ceremony, which is a circuit that goes around where you see the arrow. It goes around the entire There's a pond in the center, and you can go through 4 different tea houses. You have this one in here, which is used mostly in the autumn, the Geparo. You have this one in here, Shinkote, which is used mostly in the winter. You have the Shokate in here, which is a small one that should be used mostly in the spring. And you have the Shoiken back here, which is used in the summer, typically used in the summer. Okay, so Katsura district in Kyoto had long been favored by especially by the nobles, the members of the Heian court. And the Heian court is from roughly the 1800 to the 1200, roughly 400 years. They like this area as a preferred location to view the moon. Okay. Why viewing the moon? Well, it's part of the idea of Zen Buddhism. Okay, Zen Buddhism has several principles, and I'm not an expert on Zen Buddhism, but briefly speaking, it's part of the idea of Zen Buddhism is the denial of the ego, the focus on the interconnectedness between the person and the universe. So interconnectedness with the universe, the recognition of attachment as a source of suffering, the realization that human perception can be faulty, which makes sense. The realization that life should be simple. So here are nobles in Japan, influenced by Zen Buddhism, saying that life should be simple. Okay, and this is their expression of a simple life, this house and this garden. Okay. And the notion that you want to be free from greed and desire. So this is all part of Zen Buddhism. And there was a prince, his name was Toshihito, and he had been familiar from an early age with the tale of Genji. The tale of Genji is the tale that is at the heart of Japanese culture. And the tale of Genji, there's a scene where Genji, the main character, is forced to live in austere lodgings. Inspired by that scene, somebody named Senho Rikyu used that scene to lay down the principles of the tea ceremony. Okay, so Toshihito built the koshoin. He was the first one, the koshoin. And notice that koshoin is made up of the word, or is a composed word of ko and shoin. Shoin means room, basically. And a room this is the shoin, the room in here, if you see my cursor, surrounded by other rooms or verandas or circulation areas, and separated from all the other areas by shoji screens. Okay, these are shoji screens, which are thin partitions that move to open the room or close the room. And it was the shoin was a room used to give lectures, to talk about nature, to talk about the relationship between man and nature, humans and nature, to talk about Zen Buddhism. Okay, so this is what they came to do here. They came here to the Geparo, which was a tea house for the tea ceremony, to look at the moon, to look at the nature, to look at the stars, and to deny self, to deny the luxuries that they had in their houses somewhere else. They came here to the country to deny self, okay, to have a Zen experience. Notice also that the organization of all of these rooms is based on tatami mats. Tatami mats roughly measure about 3 feet by 6 feet. So you can, by adding up all of these tatami mats, you can see how big these houses are. They're not palatial by any stretch of our Western mind. Okay, in fact, they're almost poor. And that's key. That's a key thing to think about. Okay, So the son of Toshihito, uh, Toshidata, so Toshihito built this in 1615 to 1624, this area here of the palace. Toshidata built the Chushoin and added a bathroom because there was no bathroom here, and a toilet. No, a toilet and a bath. So he made this finally into a real house, not just a shoin, but the house itself. So this was called a Chushoin. And then Toshidata later adopted Prince Sashi, which was one of the emperor's sons. I'm not sure why he adopted him, but he did. And so when the emperor came to visit, he built this part in here, the Shingoten, which is much more elaborate and fancy for the emperor to stay. Okay, so this is the Koshoin, the old building. And notice if you concentrate on the building itself, it's very symmetrical, almost formal in organization, bilateral symmetry around this axis. Okay. The Shoin style of architecture is more formal. There are two styles of Japanese architecture, Shoin and Tsukiya. And Katsura is a combination of both, Shoin and Shukira. This part in here is the more Shoin style, okay? This is a purely Shoin style of architecture right here. Okay, it was ceremonial. It was used for mansions. It was of the military. Okay, but then in Katsura, when they started adding other parts to the house, then it became less formal. It became more asymmetrical. With the staggered asymmetrical quality, you begin to get the idea of a Tsukiya style introduced into Katsura. Okay, this part here, this is the last building added, the Shingoten, added by Toshidata also in 1654. So this whole thing started in 1615. By 1654, this building had been added to house the emperor during his visits. In the end analysis, Katsura is more informal. It's a more informal version of a Shoin style, if you will. Okay, and you will see in later slides, you will see how aspects of the Tsukiya style that are even less formal and even more intimate than what you see here. Okay, so back to the idea of the circuit around the garden. So as you go around, the reason why this path that you go around is called the roji, the dewy path. It is intended to cleanse and prepare the mind for the oncoming tea ceremony. So the reason you're doing this is to observe items in nature that have been carefully crafted so that you begin to get rid of yourself and begin to immerse, to become zoned into Zen Buddhism, into the tea ceremony that is about to happen. Okay, so you go through several areas. This one is called the, if I can pronounce this correctly, the Amano Hashidate, which is basically a sandbar jutting out into the water. And the reference is to a bridge to heaven. Okay, so you can see it here. This is a bridge. This is also a bridge. And it's a series of rocks and sand put together. A bridge to heaven. I mean, at the end of the bridge, there's nothing. Okay, so heaven, nothing. I'm not sure how they equate the two. Okay. This is the Shocking Tay, which is the first tea house seen back from the main building, from the Shoin or from the Geparo of the main building. And you can see here the Amano Shahidate back here, okay, in this area. And you can see this composition, which looks almost haphazard in the garden, but it isn't haphazard. This is all carefully manicured to give you several vistas and to place you in relation to nature, to make you one with nature. Very different from Western idea of the garden being imposed or order being imposed in the garden. This is almost the opposite. Okay, so this is the Suhana, which is another aspect of your travel through through the path, through the dewy path. Okay? Each stone, each tree, each plant, water feature are painstakingly composed, presenting, as in a Suibukoga painting, and we're going to see what a Suibukoga painting is later, presenting a staging of nature to convey readings, not of nature itself, but metaphors and a mirror of the spirit, of the inner self. So these are all metaphors that people in the Japanese culture understand much better than you and I ever will attempt to. But it's important to realize that later on, European architects discovered Katsura, and this is one of the buildings that influenced modern architecture a lot. They did not understand Zen Buddhism. They loved Katsura for what it was, a beautiful building. But arguably, it's very hard to really get into Zen Buddhism unless you're part of that culture. Okay, so that I think it's important to make that point. Okay, so the Suhana is a, let me back up. The Suhama is a shore covered with pebbles, like a seashore. It's a metaphor for the seashore. Oops. And it has a small Ishidoro here, which is it's almost on the edge of the seashore, which is almost like a lighthouse, a lantern actually, but it represents a lighthouse in some way. Now, before you go inside the tea ceremony room, you have to wash in this wash basin, which is humblingly low, at a low height, for guests to wash their hands and mouths, similar to what happens in Shinto shrines. You have to wash your hands and mouth before you go into the shrine. And it's at a low height, so that you have to bow. And even the prince or the emperor bows in here and goes humblingly low. Okay? It's about abandoning the self. Here's the first tea house, the Shokintei, and the tea room is that back here. And you can enter the tea room through a gate in here. I'm not sure if you see my cursor right here. That would be the entrance to the tea room. So you don't go into the whole house, you just go directly into the tea room in here. Okay? It's called a crawl door. The entrance into the tea room is a crawl door. So this measures about 2 feet by 2 feet. It's about 2 feet from the ground. And so, a person stands up here. Your horizon line is up here. Your eyes are about at this level. So you bow down and you crawl in through that door, like crawling like a baby into the tea room. Okay? You're meant to, in doing that action, it means to free you from the constraints of social status. So anybody that goes through that entrance has no social status, basically. Okay? So note the importance of understatement in this so-called palace, right? That produces aesthetic simplicity. Note the profound beauty of the humble. We can recognize this as beautiful, but we can recognize it also as very humble in some way. These are the tatami mats in here that I was talking about before. These are the shoji screens in here. Okay, and this is a beautiful view outside to the garden. Now, all of this put together, no regular Japanese person was able to afford this. You have to be very rich to be able to put together all of this concoction of nature, rocks, what it takes to move all of this, what it takes to build all of this, right? So this is almost to some extent like Marie Antoinette, pretending that she was, what do you call it, a peasant, when in reality she's not, except that for this culture, this is very important. This is part of the culture. This is not Marie Antoinette joking around. This is real for them, okay? So there is beauty in this spare and faintly perceived spirit in here of the humble, okay? The utensils that are used in the tea ceremony must be simple and rustic. And the tea ceremony, I've never really been part of it, but I have seen some tea ceremonies on YouTube. The ladies that perform the tea ceremony move slowly, deliberately, and no rush. The point is not to drink tea rushing. It's to take your time. Nobody's talking, by the way, in the tea ceremony. It's all in introspection. It's like going on a silent retreat. Okay? So, I mean, I find the detailing of all of this architecture, even though it's rustic, is all very well thought out, carefully put together, designed, very carefully looking at the views. There's the lantern that I was talking about before. Okay, so this relates to a concept called wabi-sabi, and you may have heard, some people on this podcast may have heard of wabi-sabi before because it was made popular a few years ago by a Dutch interior design firm called Axel Vervoet. Wabi-sabi means wabi. The part wabi means resoluteness, quietness, open and straightforward attitude, but without arrogance. And sabi is antiquity, agedness, patina. Imperfections are welcome. So all of this has patina. You know, you would not, if you introduce a new metal, if you have to make this over, which this has had to be restored many times over the centuries, you would take these pieces of metal and you would patina them to make them look like they are antique. Okay? And this is what Axel Vervoet was doing a few years ago. So the notion of simplicity, almost to the point of poverty, is essential. Is the essential basis of Japanese aesthetics. This is a quote from Bruno Taut. Well, Bruno Taut was one of the architects from, I believe, Germany, who went to Japan and discovered Katsura. And he wrote this in his book, Houses and People of Japan. Obviously a Western view of things, but that's who we are, right? We're Westerners trying to understand this architecture, because this architecture influenced modern architecture today. And I will show that later in the next iteration of this. So it's hard to see here, but the entrance, that low entrance, is back here. It's hard to see in this picture. So you come in, and this is the hearth for the tea ceremony, right here. So this is the room where the tea ceremony happens. Okay, I'm going to read that quote again because I think it's important. Simplicity, almost to the point of poverty, is the essential basis of Japanese aesthetics. Okay, this is the interiors. This type of interior follows the notion of the Japanese word hie, H-I-E, hie, and yaseru ideas. That is to become spare or thin. The spare nature of the walls with their natural earth tone and solid colors present the three-dimensional equivalent of the void space in a Suibukoga painting, the three-dimensional equivalent of the void space in a Suibukoga painting. This is Suibukoga painting, okay? This is the void space in here, or this space in here, or this area back here, or this space in here. So Suibukoga paintings are not depicting everything that you see, but you get the sense of what it is that you're looking at. And your mind fills in the rest of the story. Your mind fills in what's in here, or what's in here, or what's beyond here, right?
Manuel, just a very quick tangent here, and then we'll come back. But I can't help but be reminded, obviously, in addition to how Japanese architecture in Katsura influences modern architecture, some of the what we're seeing here, especially on the top left, this reminds me a little bit of something like Goya. You know, certain Goya paintings have kind of this very blurred background. Do you know if there's any influence there, or is that two separate strands that don't touch each other?
Well, it depends who you ask this question. If you ask my teachers at Columbia, Mary McLeod, one of my teachers, would say that Goya was a proto-modernist. Okay, was he a proto-modernist? Maybe. Arguably, you can think of Goya as being a proto or a pre-modernist painter. So these ideas were germinating in Europe at the time. And some of the artists were experimenting with not being photorealistic. But well, Rembrandt was not photorealistic, but not being they wanted to experiment with the medium of the paint as such, right? They were being less representative, like Manet were being less representative, and Goya is beginning to do that, though he's not really. Goya is not he's not considered a what do you call those artists? Manet and Monet.
Impressionist.
Impressionist. Goya is not considered an impressionist, obviously, but he's right before them. Now there were other artists at the time in the 19th century that were like the pre-Raphaelites that were emulating the more classical architects like Titian and Raphael and Michelangelo and Da Vinci, right? So there were all these currents happening at the time. Did Goya ever see these Bukoga paintings? I don't know. I would like to know. That would be an interesting speculation that Goya looked at these paintings and was influenced by them. I'm not sure. But these paintings obviously predate Goya, so arguably he could have seen them. These paintings are from the 1600s, right? So an interesting thesis. I need to look into this. So this type of painting represents essence versus form, and the experience of visually traversing space that results in a new self-knowledge through introspection. What these paintings are meant to do is to put you in a zone, to zone you out of yourself into the tea ceremony. The tea ceremony is very important. Okay? Now, notice how different that type of architecture is from the Shoin style. The Shoin style of Japanese architecture is more formal, more ceremonial, symmetrical. Even the shoji screens are more formal and ornamental. They are painted with specific scenes, not Suibukoga paintings, but some other type of painting, right? More more literal in that sense. You can see back there. So Katsura is not about this. Katsura is different. We're going to look at the Shokate next, because the Shokate is not exactly what Katsura, the palace, is either, but this is like the extreme example of the Tsukiya style. So Katsura is in between Shoin and Tsukiya style, as I said before. So this is an extreme example. The Shokate is a spring tea house, right? The quintessential example of the Tsukiya style. It is rustic, modest. It originates in humble farmers' houses and is an organic, ad hoc fusion of elements. Elements such as the roof, the window, the hearth, the screen, the tatami mat. Okay? It's almost an ad hoc representation or an ad hoc collection of elements. That is pure Tsukiya style. And this is very heavily influenced modernist architecture at the turn of the century in Europe. So now we're going to Jefferson. So Katsura is the polar opposite of Monticello. Monticello is a rational imposition of the Cartesian order of nature. Okay, remember that the Enlightenment started, according to historians, started in 1715, arguably. And Jefferson, on 1768, Jefferson contracted a man by the name of John Moore to clear and level a mountaintop. Let me say that again, clear and level a mountaintop. This is not Japan. They don't do that in Japan. They don't clear and level mountaintops. Jefferson did that here. Okay, this is documented. So this is not speculation. This is actually, all of this is documented. So this was located in the southwest of Charlottesville in the Piedmont region of Virginia. 4 roundabout roads encircled the mountain at different elevations going up the mountain, and we're connected to one another by roads that cut across the mountainside obliquely. Okay, so these are Jefferson drawings, by the way. Jefferson himself, the 3rd president of the United States, is actually, his hand is drawing what you see here on the screen, which I find absolutely fascinating. I'm so glad of it. Okay, so this is, as I said, a different conception of nature. Jefferson is intimately involved in the planning of and every detail of the garden and of his house for this property. This view shows how he subdivided it into a large grove to the northwest, large grove of trees, and to the south he had the vegetable garden, the veggie garden, and the orchard. Okay, then the famous lawn, Western Lawn, is right here in front of Monticello itself. This is Monticello, and the view that you see on every nickel is from the West Lawn right here. Okay, so he hired a crew of enslaved laborers to move 200,000 cubic feet of Piedmont clay and to expand and transform the vegetable garden here. Okay. Which shows how much importance he gave to the surrounding. So it's not just about the house, it's about the whole ensemble, the whole thing. In fact, Jefferson wanted to integrate farm and garden elements. And this idea was prevalent at the time. There was a man, let me go first talk about this. He integrated the farm and garden elements. You can see here how he was actually, this is again a drawing from Jefferson, actually specifying each and every tree or plant that would go around this oval area to the east. And he was making notes about what's going to happen on the west of the property here in this part back here. So there was this man by the name of Stephen Schweitzer who wrote a book in 1742 called the Iconographia Rustica. And Jefferson read this book. Jefferson was, in fact, Many gardens in the south of the United States were influenced by this book, I found out in doing research for this lecture. Iconografia Rustica, or The Nobleman, Gentleman, and Gardener's Recreation, containing directions for the surveying, distributing of a county seat into rural and extensive gardens by the ornamenting and decoration of distant prospects, farms, parks, and paddocks. You can see here the building with um, arguably what seems to be hedges, tall hedges on either side, and the garden in the center, the rational imposition of reason on nature, an enlightenment idea. Okay, so this is the view that everybody is familiar with from the nickel, but this is not what you see when you first come in. What you see is actually this. The building is several stories high, 1, 2, 3 stories, and it's got a lower a basement level down here that connects actually to the other parts of Monticello, to the service wings. But this is the part that is iconic because it's the first time that a dome is placed on a domestic building, on a house. Where did that come from? Well, Jefferson was an admirer of Palladio, Andrea Palladio, who was an architect in Vicenza, arguably a mannerist architect, but to my mind, he was actually a very classical. He wrote a book called the 4 Books of Architecture, but Jefferson's copy was from a guy named James Leone, who interpreted that book into English or translated it into English, and he called it The Architecture of Andrea Palladio. So Jefferson's copy dates from 1715, which is actually the beginning of the Enlightenment. What a coincidence. Jefferson also lived in France as the American minister to the United States from 1784 to 1789. And this Hotel de Salm that you see here on the right side of the screen was being built between 1782 and 1787. So any relationship between this building and Monticello is arguably coincidental, or is it actually Jefferson saying, I like this, I want to do it in the US, I want to do it for my house? We can only speculate at this time. So, but this is not the iconic facade that you have on every nickel because it's not as interesting, but this is actually how you came into the building. You came in through this entrance into what is called the entry hall, and then you went into the parlor. The parlor is, I'm going to go back again, the parlor is this room, which is not directly under the dome because there's a dome room above the parlor, which is up here, which is used for nothing other than having a dome room. So this is the parlor. The main parts of the house face the garden, the western garden. Perhaps it's because the sun sets in the west and you wanted to be warm when you went to sleep. This is Jefferson's bedroom in here, and this is his study. This is Jefferson's dining room, the house's dining room, and this is the tea room in here. And these parts out here are called piazzas. Today we call them loggias, but back then they were called piazzas. So they had an Italian name to them. Okay. Monticello is actually not just the house itself, but it's also the dependency wings on both sides, which house the kitchen, the dairy, the wash house, the privy, horse stalls, and some of the slaves lived there as well. Some of the slaves that were closest to Jefferson. And above them, these were nestled into the ground, by the way. So this is one of my old bosses, Jack Robertson's favorite devices. You can see how these dependency wings you can see them fully from this end, but actually the ground slightly slopes up. And this all ground is elevated so that from the house, all you see is the top of the terrace of these wings. So you don't see the actual wings itself. Okay. So Jefferson is taking classical architecture from Palladio and from France, bringing it to the US, interpreting it in his own mind, and making a really cool building and, and slash farmhouse. It's both a house and a farmhouse. And he received dignitaries in here. So this is because this happens to be the house of the third president of the United States. So this was no slouch house, no slouch farmhouse here, right?
Manuel, what in your view, what constitutes the translation of these influences from France into the US?
Palladio built in stone, okay, or well, parts of it in stone, parts of it in stucco, and the roofs were slate, I believe. These guys are doing copper roofs in France and stone outside. In the Piedmont, what you have is brick. You have brick, you have wood, lots of wood. Okay. So the windows are different. You don't have windows like Palladio had in here or the French had. You have more modest windows. The scale is more modest as well. So he's taking some of these elements and making them his own, transforming them slightly. And also the three-dimensionality of this house, which I'm going to explain more fully later. But this house is 2 stories on one side, 1 story on the other. What gives? What happens? How does this all work? Right. So I will show that in drawing sections. So, and this idea, I'm sure, this is not unique to Jefferson, but the way this is at the very top of the mountain. So the mountain is going downhill from here. He's already expressing that in how he used these dependency wings. So he's using brick and he's using, I believe this is metal for the roof, tin. So he's using local materials and wood. Okay, so that's part of what he's doing. He's translating, he's making this, appropriating this for the new architecture of the US. He's experimenting with what the new architecture of the United States of America should be. And I'm going to talk about that later. So part of that thought happens later in the lecture. Okay, so let me just continue with explaining what the dependency wings are doing in here. The north is going to be to the left because the rest of the plans of the house are oriented this way. So the north is to the left, the south is to the right. This is the western lawn in here, and that's the east where you come into the house from the east. And so you have in here, you have the ice house. Oops, sorry. What happened? You have the ice house. You have the stables. You have the law office in here. You have the kitchen. You have some of the slave quarters, and you even have a honeymoon suite out here. Interesting. So again, you come into the house. In here, this is the entry hall. This is the parlor, which notice there's a lot of references to octagons, but the only octagonal room in the whole house is this bedroom in here. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sides. The only perfect octagon. Everything else is a half octagon. This octagon is truncated. This octagon is a half octagon. It's missing the other 2 walls to make it into a real octagon. This is the parlor room. This is Jefferson's bedroom. His bed is here in this niche, and it's between his bedroom and his study. So he could wake up and go to the bedroom and get dressed and go out, and meet people out here, or he could go into his study in the middle of the night if he was inspired to write something and write it here. This is his library. His library is actually all of these series of rooms together. This south piazza was used as his greenhouse and workshop. And in here, this is the dining room. This is the tea room. This is the north piazza. As I said, the only octagonal bedroom in the house, square bedroom. Now, something interesting happens when you go to the second floor. The second floor is only second floor on the eastern half of the house for the most part. So the parlor room is a two-story room. The dining room is 2 stories with a skylight above. His bedroom is 2 stories with a skylight above. The library is 2 stories. So the house has areas that are 2 stories and areas that are 1 story within the house. This room is hybrid. It's got part of it has a second story balcony overlooking the room. So it's a strange room. But this is, when you come in, this is the room that begins to introduce the octagonal geometrical idea before you get into the rest of the house. And this is the famous dome room, which you really want to, if you want to get here, you really want to get here. And when you get here, there's nothing. It's just a room full of windows. Fabulous place to have a meeting, but I don't know if you ever had meetings up there. So here's a section looking south through Jefferson's bedroom. Notice this is a 2-story bedroom, and his bed is down here, okay? And opens, it's in a niche that opens onto his study beyond. Okay, these are bedrooms on the other side. This is, I think this is a bedroom, and this is a bedroom in here. This is the famous dome room above the parlor in here. And this is the entry hall. You enter through this loggia here, or this entrance portico, into the entrance hall. And it has a balcony, which is it's a partial octagon overlooking the entrance hall. And notice this area back here, down here, this is a tunnel that connected through into the dependency wings on either side, so that the servants could come and go into the house. Okay, this is a section through the octagonal bedroom, and this is the dining room. Notice that the dining room is a 2-story room and has a skylight on top. Hard to see the skylight in this section, but you'll see it in the next section. Here you go. Here's the dining room with a skylight. Jefferson's bedroom with a skylight. Jefferson's bed goes into this niche, and he can get up and go into his bedroom or into his study on this side. This is the southern piazza that he used as his workshop. This is the dining room with a skylight, and this is the tea room. And the room in the center, in here, beautiful room, is the parlor room where he receives visitors. This is the north piazza, and this is the south piazza that he used as his workshop and greenhouse. So here's the entrance hall. What am I doing with time? I'm almost at the hour. Sorry about that. I'll be quick. Here's the entry hall, and here's the balcony overlooking the entry hall, which begins to show the octagonal geometry of the house. You don't really get the full idea of the orthogonal geometry until you get into the parlor room, a double-story room overlooking the western lawn. Okay, but this is only really a half octagon because the 2 walls and the wall behind you are regular parts of a square. Okay, now this room is very comfortable in a Palladian house. The proportions of these rooms, unlike the rooms of Katsura, where we were talking about the Tsukiya style and things being almost added ad hoc, right? In the extreme Tsukiya style of one of the tea houses. These rooms are carefully proportioned. they're using harmonic proportions because Palladio was using harmonic proportions, and Palladio has a whole theory about how harmonic proportions relate. Part of harmonic ratios have to do with, yes, with music, but also with the golden means. The golden means is found in nature over and over and over. Your finger is a series of golden means. So this part of your finger is to this part of your finger as this part of your finger is to all of this. This is to, I'm sorry, this is to this is to this as this is to the whole finger, and so on and so forth. You can, your whole body is a series of harmonic proportions. So is Western rational architecture bad, or is because it's so rational? I argue that of course it's not. It's good because it's based on the human being, the body. But am I attracted to the simple quality of Japanese architecture? You bet I am, and I think most of us in today's world probably are as well. It's the dining room, an old photograph of the dining room looking into the tea room beyond. This is the dining room, photograph of the dining room looking south. The tea room will be behind us, and this opens. This opens onto the piazza beyond. I need to look at the plan. Anyway, here's the tea room. Here's Jefferson's bedroom and his study beyond. So his bed opens both to the study and to his bedroom proper. Here's the library. And here's the perfect north octagonal room with the bed in its niche there. And here's the famous dome room that we have talked about.
How did they heat a place like this back at that time?
Well,
room by room, I guess.
Well, part of okay, let me go. It's a good section too. Maybe this one. So part of the stuff that is heating the house starts down here in the cellar. So I don't have a plan of the cellar, do I? I don't think I do. I didn't show you a plan of the cellar, but part of the, so what's happening is that underneath the house, they have furnaces. Usually they used to have furnaces. They should have furnaces. I believe that that's what happened. And so they let the air run through. But these guys in the 1800s, they were not into the comfort like we are today, into the, being comfortable. So the rooms that face south and west are going to be the more comfortable rooms. The rooms that face north and east are going to be the more uncomfortable rooms in the house. That's just the way it works. So these rooms have skylights to take advantage of the sunlight coming in and to heat the rooms. These rooms don't have skylights, and they only have a single window. One window in here, one window in this room, one window in here. These have small windows in here. So you heat with the mass of, you make the walls massive enough so that they help you a little bit, and you reduce the number of windows inside the room. So it's a combination of elements, but it's all, it's not like what we do it the way we do things today, obviously. I wanted to make a point when I got to the dining room. Notice these moldings in the dining room that are gargantuan. In fact, you see it better here. When you compare this door with this molding, you say, wait a second, this looks, in fact, it's so big in relation to the, the molding around the door. And that in itself is already very big. When you look at a book, for instance, next to this, you say, wow, these moldings are huge. And these are gargantuans. What's going on? My old boss, Jack Robertson, wanted to put words in Jefferson's mouth. And he said this. Jack Robertson said that Jefferson would have said something like this. He said, out here in the, and I can almost do it in Jack's patrician, hefty voice. He said, out here in the wilderness, I must exaggerate classical reference or no one will hear me. So that there may be truth. That may be something that Jefferson was doing. So you were asking before, how is Jefferson appropriating and changing classical architecture here? This is one of the ways that he's doing it. He is saying out here in the wilderness, I must exaggerate classical reference or no one will hear me. I think that's interesting, in my opinion. So we'll come to the end. I apologize that I've taken so much of everyone's time here. We're almost at the end here. Jefferson moved away from the English Baroque Wren type of architecture. In fact, this building was designed by Wren at the College of William and Mary, and people call it the Wren Building. It was designed by Christopher Wren, actually. So he moved away from this type of architecture and chose instead the Neoclassicism that was inspired by his visit to France. And this is the Maison Carrée, which is a Roman building in the south of France, in Nîmes. Notice the relationship or the similarity between the Maison Carrée and the Virginia State Capitol designed by Thomas Jefferson. Okay. Now, how did he appropriate architecture, Roman architecture, and made it American? Look at how this building is not an office building. The Maison Carrée is not an office building, but this is an office building. So you can clearly see that it's got offices, 2 stories, windows. Okay, so he is very practical man, taking the architecture of the classical period, Roman classical architecture, and turning it into American architecture, using it for the American architecture, using it as a basis for the new Republican architecture, partially because he wanted to get away from this. He wanted to get away from the Brits. This is what the Brits were doing. This is what Britain represents. Okay, we're independent. We just signed the Declaration of Independence. Let's not do this again. Let's not go into this type of architecture. Let's do something else. Okay, this is the University of Virginia, designed by Thomas Jefferson. Notice that he used in here these dependency wings, and they're partially buried underground. And then each one of these colleges, these are independent colleges, are actually slightly different variations on the theme of classical architecture, and they're used as pedagogical buildings for the students. So the formation of the student at the University of Virginia in Jefferson's mind was not only intellectual, it was also visual, it was also architectural. And I believe that brings me to the end of this topic. The next topic will be how what happened in Europe, why we ended up abandoning, or we ended up rejecting to some degree the neoclassicism of Jefferson and of all the other architects that were happening. They were doing neoclassical architecture at the time in favor of something more Japanese, something more simple, perhaps something more Zen. That will be the next and last installment of this.
Well, stay tuned for that. And thanks again, Manuel. Great discussion.
My pleasure. Thank you.